It is, and the recording is now in progress. It is now 9:02. We will start with the roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Ackerman,
Here.
Commissioner Bogue,
Here.
Commissioner Cross,
Present.
Commissioner McGowan,
Here.
Commissioner Mesner,
Here.
Commissioner Oath, Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 6 out of 7 commissioners present.
Great. Well, it's great to see everybody. We have a busy agenda today. We start our agenda with commissioner comments. I have some comments, but I wanted to see if anyone else had comments for the good of the cause. Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to update the commission that the Produced Water Consortium has held a number of meetings over the last couple of days. We've broken the whole stakeholder group down into 3 separate subgroups, and I had talked to you about that before, but just so folks know, we did have our first subgroup meetings this week. Subgroups consisted of a sub-working group around beneficial use of produced water outside the oil field. Another group discussed recycling and reuse of produced water inside the oil field. And then a third group began looking at legal, legislative, policy issues around the utilization of produced water. So first 3 subgroup meetings happened over the last couple of days. And we'll have a number of additional meetings moving forward here, but I just wanted to update folks that that is in process.
Excellent. Thank you, Commissioner Messner, for the update. Others with thoughts? Well, I wanted to update commissioners. I got back late last night from attending the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission on behalf of Colorado. That commission is a commission that was created by legislative charter, like 1934. It is the members are all of the oil and gas producing states within the nation, as well as 4 provinces from Canada. It meets twice a year. In the meetings, we learn about things that are relevant to work we're all doing jointly. So we had a lot of work on the orphan well federal funding. I'll try to provide some perspective to Mike Rigby and our team on that, as well as the commission, once I get my feet underneath me. We also have an opportunity to advocate on behalf of oil and gas producing states to the federal government. And I was happy that we were successful. Colorado pushed forward a resolution encouraging the federal government to continue to provide money and assistance on carbon capture and sequestration, which is an area that is of great interest to a number of states, as is Colorado. Many of the states are in the pursuit of primacy from the EPA to be able to permit such programs. That resolution passed and will move forward to the U.S. Congress and the president. And so happy about that. Some other resolutions that were somewhat political did not pass. So all in all, it was a good meeting, and had a good chance to meet with some of our other state governments. I would let you guys know that there are at least 4 states that are interested in reviewing their financial assurance protocol, and they are looking to Colorado and the work we did to determine what might be best for their states. So happy for us to lead on that front. So that's my update from the COGCC. With that, I believe we are through commissioner comments. We have a consent agenda. Does anyone have questions on consent? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve consent?
So moved.
Second.
A motion by Commissioner Ackerman, second by Commissioner Cross. Any questions? All those in favor of consent signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right. Continuing forward, we next on our agenda is an update from KPK as well as staff on its progress under the terms of the compliance plan entered in order number 1V as in Victor 772, docket 2011000261. Ms. Larson, I believe we will start with, I think we have one person from the public that desires to comment, and I see Ms. Slaman. I'm sorry, I may have butchered your last name, but
That's okay. It's close. It's Slayman.
Slayman. Okay, short A. Very good. You have 3 minutes to provide us your perspective on the KPK matter.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, for giving me the opportunity. I live in the Windham Hill neighborhood of Frederick, Colorado. And on approximately August 15th, a group of workmen began digging a large hole behind our home, directly behind our home. Our home's backyard opens to a green space with a walkway between the home and the county road there. When I asked a couple of days later what was going on, the gentleman there, I don't think English was their first language, but they responded with no gas, and declined to answer any other questions. There were no logos on any of the trucks or any of that. So it was nearly impossible to figure out what was going on or who was doing the work. Our HOA knew nothing about it as well, because I did reach out to our HOA board. That hole's now grown to be an excavation that spans the entire property line of our home and extends to be parallel to our neighbors on both sides as well. It also extends from nearly the walking path almost all the way to Weld County Road 14.5. It's my estimate that hole is between 15 and 20 feet deep. And after the first day of excavation, that hole was left with no fencing. And after the second day of excavation, a railing was put up, but it was not sufficient to keep neighborhood children from exploring. And as children might do, they see a big hole, they think, oh, how fun. My partner and I spent several hours in the backyard after both those evenings chasing kids away so they wouldn't get injured. No notice of this excavation project was given. Questions to the people working on it led nowhere. It wasn't until I filed a complaint with the commission that I was contacted by Nikki Graber and told that it was an oil leak and a produced water leak with some negligible gas leakage as well. We were all of the neighbors were left to wonder for several weeks what this was and whether we were in danger. I was contacted later by a representative from KPK who said that they had notified the Metro District that owns the land and asked them to contact nearby homeowners. I asked him for the names of who he contacted at the Metro District because I wanted to follow up on why no notification was given to any of us. And I never heard back. It's been about 2 weeks. I did find out this morning that the remediation should begin soon, as the soil tests have indicated that they'd be able to move forward with replacing that dirt and, solidifying the fix to the leak and replacing that dirt. And while this is good news, I don't feel like the overall process has been a good one. While I understand it may not be a legal requirement to notify adjacent landowners, it seems prudent and good business to do so, and to not have, especially when not that far from here, not that long ago, some homes literally blew up. And so we were all left wondering, what is the leak? Is it a gas leak? The fire department came out. I wasn't here at the time that the fire department came out, but I've had neighbors say that the fire department said it was a gas leak. So it was all very confusing and very frightening. I was concerned that my home and the homes around me are at risk. I'm concerned the fix won't be up to codes. And much of these concerns are frankly due to lack of communication. But I'm concerned that no permits have been pulled for the project, because I've heard that as well. I'm concerned for the safety of myself and my family. I'm concerned the replacement dirt will be sufficient to avoid issues in the future, such as sinkholes or integrity to the sidewalk that's there that people use on a daily basis. And all of this it's now apparent that this is a serious and significant issue, and there's been almost no communication. And I'm the only one of the neighbors that I know of that's even been communicated to, and that's only after I filed a complaint. And it's within 30 feet of my property line. And all of this, not to mention the nuisance of the noise, the dirt, the insects and rodents that have been upended with this huge hole. I realize that's all part of the process and can't be avoided. But again, zero communication around this. I don't, no timelines, nothing. I just want answers to what's happening and assurances that the fixes that are happening are to code and won't be problematic in the future, and that they're in compliance with all safety measures. I wanted to know if my family should have to evacuate our property while this remediation took place. And I'd also, on a smaller note, like to be assured that the landscaping that was removed when this all happened will be replaced as well, because that's something that the homeowners in this neighborhood will bear the cost of if KPK doesn't replace that. So I thank you for your time, and I thank you for letting me sort of express my concerns and my overall dissatisfaction with the way this played out.
So Ms. Slavin, first off, thank you for taking time this morning out of your schedule to be with us. Second off, we're about to hear an update from KPK with regard to all the work that they're supposed to be doing. If you've got some time, I would encourage you to continue to listen in, because what we should hear from KPK ought to be responsive to the thoughts and concerns you've expressed. As chair of this commission, I would venture to say that I don't think anything you've said is out of place. It sounds to me that that's all fairly correct in terms of the concerns you've expressed. I'm not sure about specific notification requirements under the quote rules, but being a good neighbor ought to be part of a company's approach to work that they're doing within neighborhoods. And if what you're saying is true, that's not being a really good neighbor. Again, thank you for your time. Stick around if you can and listen in, and we'll see what KPK's got to say.
Great. Thank you so much. And I do have a few minutes. I have to join another meeting in about a half hour, but I will listen as long as I can.
Okay. And for what it's worth, our meetings are posted on YouTube after the fact. So if you can't stick around the full time now, you can always go back this evening or tomorrow and listen to the full meeting and the full response from KPK to the update they're going to give us, as well as the concerns you've raised.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks again. Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious if this site that Ms. Slayman is talking about is on the GRIP list that we're going to be discussing today, or the quarterly check-in. If it's not, it might be in everyone's best interest for us just to ask KPK kind of about the site and what happened, and so that she can leave and not have to sit through our whole discussion, and kind of get a feel for what KPK was trying to do and how we might be able to do better next time.
Well, I see we have all the representatives from KPK with us. They're all visualized, and so maybe they can do an audible and respond to this issue first, so that Ms. Slayman can hear about that before they move into their general presentation. So with that, I would recognize Mr. Jacobs and his panel. I believe now we are at that spot of the agenda in which KPK will provide its quarterly update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Director Murphy. John Jacobs with Davis, Graham and Stubbs for KP Kaufman Company, Inc. Pleased to be here to provide you with our update. We can certainly briefly address the concerns raised by Ms. Slayman. I believe that some of that is new information, certainly for me and possibly for some of my clients. We do address the Rogers release spill and its current status, which is very close to backfill. We just got conditional approval for backfill in our presentation, but to accommodate Ms. Slayman's schedule and your request, Mr. Chair, I would ask Mr. Todkus and Mr. Meese, who I'll introduce to the full commission here in our presentation shortly, but Kevin Todkus with Marcom is our project manager for the primary contractor, and Craig Meese is the new executive director of EHS and compliance for KP Kaufman Company. Kevin and or Craig, if you'd like to very briefly just address the Rogers site, and of course we'll sort of double up on that in a moment in our presentation, but just for Ms. Slayman's benefit, I think that would be responsive and appropriate.
Well, thank you, John. I can start off, and Ms. Slayman, I can address the environmental concerns. Thank you for your comments today and for sharing them with us. From the environmental standpoint, to address your concerns, investigations were completed following that release, including the installation of soil borings to identify the extent of contamination and make sure that there was no immediate risk, either from soil or groundwater contamination or potentially vapor migration from that release to the adjacent residences. So I can assure you that based on the information that we collected, we did not identify an immediate release to public health, including adjacent residences. And just a brief update, source removal activities around that excavation are complete. There's no identified contamination in the soil, and we haven't identified groundwater at that site either. And again, also the vapor, there's no potential for explosive accumulations of vapors in the subsurface either. We haven't identified that. So at this point, as Mr. Jacobs indicated, the remedial excavation is complete. We've submitted the documentation to the state, and they have tentatively approved us to proceed with backfill. And that is scheduled to begin as soon as we can iron out some of the right-of-way access permits and some of the other items out there to make sure that we can complete that work safely. The backfill sources have been tested. They're clean, and there's no potential for contamination. We have analytical data to show that those sources are clean. And KPK will conduct the backfill, and I'll have Craig speak about that. But they'll conduct the backfill and compact that material to make sure that to minimize the potential for settling out there. So we shouldn't have any settling. And in addition, we'll be conducting post-excavation reclamation monitoring for quite some time just to make sure that that excavation is backfilled properly. And Craig can speak a little bit about your other concerns. So I'll turn it over to Craig at this point.
Yeah, Ms. Slum, appreciate your comments. This incident happened on August 12th, and I started August 22nd. Needless to say, I came right into the fire. But nonetheless, with regard to the communication, I noticed on the Form 19 submitted for this, the communication as far as to local governments was to Frederick, the town of Frederick, and to Weld County. And then John Lee with Windham Hill. He's the developer of the subdivision there. We considered that to be the appropriate notification. Obviously, knowing now the size and scope that the hole turned into, probably would have been more prudent to reach out to area homeowners in the area, and is certainly good practice, and we should take that into consideration. Another thing that I think that you point out with regard to maybe the language barrier that you may have run into by way of our crews that were out there when you approach them, is maybe issuing them some cards such that they can provide you a card. And I will take that to note and to heart as well, and try to implement that as well, just to enhance that communication there. Obviously it's our goal to reach out and enhance our communication. We thought we made all the appropriate notifications to at least the parties involved, but not necessarily adjacent to. The size and scope of the project certainly changed with regard to the size of the impacts. That certainly evolves as we continue to dig and find the extents of the excavation. But we do have a slide in here that speaks to this specifically, but and I think Avi did reach out to you specifically. I think on the I saw it at the complaint filed as Shannon Espinola, I believe, but nonetheless, obviously your comments made are the same. So I assume it was you that made that. And so Avi did, I know, reach out to you about that. And so to Kevin's point, we do intend to be backfilling that here very shortly, as soon as we address a couple of the COAs that were a part of that closure request.
Thanks, Craig.
I hope this is helpful.
If I could clarify, Avi is Avi Mailer, the Vice President of Land for KP Kaufman. And then just one other minor point. I think Kevin You indicated that you'd quickly done soil borings after the release in response and determined the lack of threat to area homes from migration of production fluids, vapors. At that time, didn't you request to do more site characterization and not to simply begin excavating, and that was not approved by staff?
Yeah, John, yeah, we wanted to do a little bit more evaluation. Our initial investigation did not identify any potential impacts to adjacent receptors, including Ms. Slayman or adjacent residents or the road. And then at that point, we had wanted to conduct additional investigation in order to kind of identify the potential size and scope of the remedial efforts in terms of the soil excavation. And staff basically requested that we immediately begin additional source removal activities in lieu of that investigation.
Thank you. Just wanted to make sure that that was clear. Hopefully that addresses the concerns, Mr. Chair.
Just couple of follow-up points. It's election season. Every time I come home, I have another 2 or 3 pamphlets stuck in my door from people, vote for me kind of thing. It's not in our rule, but I think it would be a good neighborly thing to do. I appreciate your point, Mr. Meese, that, perhaps going forward, you could, just a little flyer, we're going to be doing this over the next week. If you have any questions, here's our phone number to call. I think that would be a good neighborly approach. Second, I didn't hear any of you speak to Ms. Slayman's concern that a hole was dug and no fencing was put up to keep kids out of it. Is she right, wrong, or otherwise on that front? Do you dig holes and not put fences around them, or what?
I can certainly speak to that, and I've got literally hundreds of photos. I almost lived at that site during the excavation, obviously due to the sensitivity of the area and our concern for it. So I've got lots of photos and can verify that, at the very start, obviously I wasn't there, but starting August 22nd when I was, I visited that site many, many times, and every time we did have the cattle fencing as well as the visible or the high visibility orange construction fence. So we had kind of double fenced, if you will, to try to enhance our site safety, if you will, and access controls to that. Early on, I'm not sure, but I also don't think there was a very large excavation at the time. It was more of a hydrovac hole initially, but certainly the excavation started once I came on board.
And Craig, I can speak a little bit of that. The construction fencing was heavily used up front, especially following staff inspections that identified potential smoking in the area. The fencing was regularly inspected and maintained because we wanted to keep the public away from that excavation, particularly if they were going to be smoking along the sidewalk or anything like that. So construction fencing was heavily used. Eventually that was upgraded to the steel cattle fencing with signage, with warnings to keep out danger type stuff like that. So
and you'll actually see a photo in this presentation of the site and that fencing.
Yeah.
So
Okay. All right. I see Commissioner McGowan has a question, but Ms. Stafford, our AAG, visualized herself first. So I'm going to see if she wanted to weigh in on this, and then we'll recognize Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. For the record, Caitlin Stafford, Assistant Attorney General on behalf of Commission staff. I think there are some pieces of this timeline that deserve some clarification, and I'd like to see if we can elevate Nikki Graber, the DJ Basin Environmental Supervisor, to the panel.
All right, I see we're bringing Ms. Graber to the panel. Just by way of framing the issue here, we're accommodating Ms. Slayman and the issue she raised. I think it is appropriate. If Mr. Jacobs and others were to raise some form of due process question, I would overrule it. I think this is fair and fundamental and makes sense to address it. We're going to get to the overall quarterly report here in just a sec, but let's flesh out this whole issue. I think it's entirely appropriate. So Ms. Graber, I would recognize you.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. So a few points to touch on. Early on, the fencing was cattle fencing, which is excellent for livestock, but not necessarily excellent. There's big gaps about that big that kids can just slide through. And the excavation type in the beginning was a bell hole excavation, which means that the top of the excavation is narrower than the bottom. It bells out. It's a pretty dangerous excavation, and it also has steep walls, so the kid was to get stuck in there. It was a big concern. Staff inspected the location and requested better fencing be put up. At that point, a second round of construction fencing was attached. And due to the length of time that was sitting open, I actually requested that KPK add plywood over the top to further restrict access from children. And I would also like to note that the soil borings were conducted on September 1st. That's 20 days after the initial spill. So there was a delay there. And then the delay in backfill currently is we are awaiting a right-of-way permit from Weld County. We did put in the initial Form 19 that they needed a Weld County right-of-way permit. That permit was submitted Monday. Is there
Okay.
anything else I need to cover?
Ms. Stafford?
Thanks, Chair Robbins. I believe that was all we wanted to clarify, just to ensure that you had the full picture.
Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Slayman, do you frequently get information through your homeowners association? Does your neighborhood, are they pretty involved? I'm just wondering if we could maybe invite KPK to work with the HOA to give kind of a timeline and an update to folks who live in the neighborhood so you all know what's going on instead of having to deliver flyers.
I think that would be amazing. The HOA is fairly involved and knew nothing about this. In fact, we went, my boyfriend and I went to an HOA board meeting to ask what they knew, since we hadn't been notified of anything. And it was only then that I, quite honestly, I didn't know the Oil and Gas Commission existed or that you could file a complaint or try to get information that way. And that is what prompted my complaint, is that they suggested that I might do that. And that is the way I got information. So I think it would be great if someone could work with the HOA, because I think they would be good about sending messages out and letting people know what was happening.
Do you know what is the name of your HOA?
I believe we're called the Windham Hill HOA number 1. I could follow up and get you contact information for our board members.
Great. And then I guess when we start going through things, I guess I would put in a parking lot issue if KPK is willing to work with the HOA just to give them updates and let them know what the schedule is so that they can let the neighbors know.
Yeah, be happy to. I think that's the challenge, is largely trying to find out who the HOA is and who the president, if they have administration. It's a challenge with HOAs. I'm on one, so I get it. But yeah, I can reach out to you, Shannon. I think Avi has your contact information, so I can make sure Avi calls you, or we can reach out to you and get that contact information for the HOA.
Great.
All right. Ms. Slayman, do you have any further thoughts, questions, issues at this point?
My only remaining question would just sort of be timeline and whether or not that the area will be returned to the status it was in prior to the hole, like the landscaping, that kind of thing.
KPK, who wants to address that issue?
That's certainly intent. Once we backfill, as Kevin talked about with regard to reclamation, monitoring, we'll be certainly doing that. We may, we plan on replacing the trees. However, where the trees might be a little different, because that was something discussed with John Lee with Windham Hill. When they did the development there, they put those trees right over the pipeline, which is probably not where they're supposed to be. So we may have to move them a bit, but we do intend on certainly replacing them if we can find a place that's more appropriate.
And the timeline for the remediation once the permits are approved.
As I've communicated with Nikki a couple times, even just this week, we want to get backfilling as soon as we get the notice to proceed from Weld County as part of the COA. So we actually should have, we filed the permit yesterday. We've got a traffic plan going in today. And so we should hopefully, if not today, maybe tomorrow, get approval, and we'll start backfilling immediately.
Okay. Thank you again for the time and for addressing my concerns.
Thank you for
Thank you.
taking time to be with us this morning. I believe that KPK will reach out to you with regard to getting contact information, and we will hopefully see this matter moving forward in the correct manner here soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. KPK, thank you for indulging the resident and the commission with a quick audible response on that front. I think that's very helpful. We now will proceed to the normal programming, which is, I believe we've got 30 minutes to hear from KPK with regard to its quarterly update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Director Murphy. We're going to screen share. My colleague, Ms. Pritchard, will be sharing screen momentarily, and then we'll get started. Our primary presenters will be myself, Craig Meese, and Kevin Totkus, and I'll do a proper introduction of them for you here shortly.
Ms. Larson, would you please allow me to share my screen? It currently says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Give me one moment.
Thank you.
It should be enabled now.
Very good. Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. Pleased to be here to update you on our progress under the compliance plan agreement. Next slide, please. Want to start with a little bit of procedural context, especially for the new commissioners. The compliance plan agreement became effective on November 5. That was also the day that an order finding violation number 1V-772 was entered by the commission following adjudication of NOAVs. We agreed to the terms of the compliance plan agreement with staff. We then next updated the commission just a couple months later, although it was characterized as a quarterly update, and we had a lot of startup and major plans and even hiring our primary contractor in that first month. That update occurred in January 2022. We then did another quarterly update last May. I believe it was the 4th. At that quarterly update, a motion was made and an order issued to have a compliance hearing under the CPA in June, which we held. At the conclusion of the compliance hearing, we were directed to have updates again approximately 90 and 180 days later. Those were scheduled for today, the first one that you're hearing from us, and then another one is scheduled for Friday, January 20th of 2023. And thereafter, we have a little less than 4 years remaining under the term of the CPA, should we be allowed to continue, which is certainly our desire. Next slide, please. I'd like to more formally introduce you now to Craig Meese, whom you've heard from due to the audible earlier in response to Ms. Slayman's public comment. Craig is the Executive Director of EHS and Compliance for KPK. As he stated, he started on August 22nd this year. He has 28 years of environmental compliance experience in the Colorado oil and gas industry, a Bachelor's of Science in Chemical Engineering and Petroleum Refining from the Colorado School of Mines. He is a Colorado native and has never lived anywhere but Colorado. He's a registered professional engineer in Colorado and Texas, and his most recent position was Vice President, EHS, Pipeline Safety, Physical Security, and Government Affairs with Tallgrass Energy, a position he held since January of 2013 before joining KPK. He's a founding member and the first West Slope COGA president and a former Mesa County commissioner. And since joining KPK almost 2 months ago, Craig has spent a significant amount of time, as you might expect, with Marcom, with Nikki Graber, the project manager for KPK's CPA-related work for staff. And we're very pleased to have Craig Meese on board with the KPK team. Next up, I'd like to introduce you to Kevin Totkus, whom you heard from a little bit earlier. Kevin joined Marcom as a senior project manager in July. He's a licensed professional geologist in Wyoming and Nebraska with over 20 years in environmental consulting experience. That experience includes positions with Earth Systems Inc. in North Glen, with Terracon Consultants in their Cheyenne office, with CGRS Inc. in Fort Collins office, among others. And those are both here out west and both also with some firms back east in West Virginia and Virginia earlier in his career. He's experienced in petroleum remediation, emergency response and abatement oversight, contractor management, and regulatory compliance services. We're very pleased to have Kevin Totkus as our project manager for Marcom, the primary contractor under the CPA. Next slide. I'll turn it over to Craig.
Yeah, thanks, John. And thank you, commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity to present this to you. And just want to say just provide this overview of what you're going to see in our presentation. We're going to touch on the recently met CPA requirements, the project progress, our process improvements, and our path forward under the CPA. We should be able to get through this in 30 minutes. We've timed it. And so we've tried to slim down the slide deck, though there is a lot of information to cover, but I'm confident we'll be able to do it in the allotted amount of time. So appreciate your time and attention. The CPA requirements that have been recently met as far as kind of our timely submissions for updates, our monthly reports for June, July, August, and September were submitted. Our quarterly reports for the second and third quarters of this year were also submitted in a timely fashion. We also had our dedicated project account statements for June, July, August, and September submitted, and then recently responded to staff's questions with regard to the June and July statements. Those responses were on October 14th. Some of the next slide, the major plans that have been submitted and or approved as part of the CPA, the GRIP, or the Global Remediation Implementation Plan, was approved on April 6th of this year. The waste management plan is still in revision. We just received comments from a couple iterations that we've gone through now. We received some comments on October 13th. We should have those comments addressed and the plan resubmitted here very shortly. The flow line integrity evaluation was accepted and deemed complete and approved on October 6th by the integrity staff. That kicked off then the integrity management plan timeline, which therefore will be due on November 7th of this year. On October 13th, the spill release reporting and training plan was approved. And so with this, I'll turn it over to Kevin. He'll touch on kind of the prioritization and risk ranking associated with our GRIP covered sites.
Thank you, Craig. Morning, everybody. I am Kevin Totkus, and I serve as the senior project manager with Marcom as KPK's primary contractor. And I'll start off with this, giving a brief overview of the GRIP covered sites and the prioritization and efforts that we've made at keeping that list up to date. So attachment A to the compliance plan agreement defines the scope of sites addressed in the GRIP. And those sites, approximately 74, if I counted correctly, included adjudicated notice of alleged violation sites and sites covered by the April 2021 Director's 901A order. As part of our work, a priority of that work has been developed per the CPA's GRIP provisions and staff comments on the draft GRIP and revised GRIP. And the priority can change based on new information regarding sensitive areas, groundwater impacts, and et cetera. Today, I will briefly discuss modifications to that priority rankings based on information that we provided to staff and the sites covered in the GRIP So the sites covered in the GRIP are placed into 3 categories. Based in the May hearing, we've made some updates to the higher, middle, and lower priority sites. And our current categorization of the site will be shown in the next 3 slides. Next. So the higher priority sites, these sites include sites where additional investigations needed either to identify the extent of soil or groundwater contamination, might be near an identified receptor, or just have a higher priority. The recent modifications of this based on the information that we provided to staff, including the Grant Tank Battery and Yoxel Farms release sites, were elevated to higher priority based on information that we've obtained. Next slide. The mid-priority sites are sites where significant and remedial efforts have been made, but still might need additional data analysis, groundwater investigation activities, but don't appear to propose an immediate threat to any identified receptors. Efforts that we've made, we've been able to move the Schaefer consolidation release site and the Nesu consolidation release sites to these mid-priority rankings. And then our lower priority sites include sites where we really haven't identified any groundwater contamination investigations complete. The bulk of remedial efforts might be complete. And really, we just need to provide additional information to keep these sites moving forward or get them even closer to closure. And some of those sites we'll discuss a little bit more later. I'd also like to kind of point out some of these global indicators of KPK significant progress. We've been able to identify and move lots of sites that are close to closure. We'll also discuss the extensive resources dedicated to achieving compliance with the CPA. We'll touch on our greatly improved excavation management. And I believe the Rogers site is a good example of that. And we can discuss the progress that we've made specifically at Rogers on that. And also the quick response to new spills and releases. And again, Rogers will be touched on. I think that's a good example of that. So sites that we've briefly, a lot of sites we've identified as very close to closure, and indeed have either submitted forms for that or have collected additional site investigation data to move these sites closer to closure. Next slide. In addition, we've identified sites that have had significant remedial progress. I'll discuss a little more of these in depth, but multiple sites, including the Nesu and soil spread field sites where we haven't identified contamination to groundwater or that impacts have been addressed. Next. I'll transition back to Craig here to discuss the significant resources and progress made to achieve compliance that KPK has made.
Yeah, just to touch on some of the resources being allocated towards these efforts to comply with the CPA. KPK has on average, 4 of the 8 roustabout crews dedicated to the remediation progress associated with the CPA. Sometimes that's more, sometimes less, but nonetheless, on about average, we allocate 4 of the crews towards that effort. Obviously, I started on August 22nd to help with regard to some of the communication, collaboration, coordination, and obviously compliance. And a big focus of my role and responsibility has largely been on assessing the gaps and curing some of the bottlenecks, which you'll see in some of these subsequent slides, which I think we've made some great improvements on. Marcom has 14 staff dedicated to KPK's CPA work, 6 of which are full-time. Obviously, some of those seem to be more full-time of the 14 than even 6 these days, but nonetheless, 6 full-time is kind of the average. Marcom and KPK, we engage weekly, at least with regard to planning and coordination meetings. We typically meet on Monday morning for a weekly field planning coordination meeting. And then on Wednesday afternoons, then we meet again for an update on projects as well as planning for the following week. So we do engage in a couple conversations at a minimum, though Kevin and I think, are attached at the hip most days. Marcom and KPK, obviously we need to increase, as was stated by Ms. Sloman, with regard to increased landowner involvement. That's certainly a goal that we aim to achieve, and we need to achieve it with regard to our communication and coordination. I think we've done a very good job there, or doing better anyway with regard to commission staff. We will continue to increase that level of effort with the broader community. Next slide. The significant resources, and this speaks to some of the gaps and bottlenecks that have been identified since my time here. Obviously, Summit Labs was our only laboratory resource for analytical services. We've since added Origins Laboratory there as well, just for hopefully quicker turnaround times, better capacity to help facilitate some of our large quantities of samples that we are submitting, so that we can get those turned around in a timely fashion. We've also added the services of Tasman to help with some of our P&A work. This is ongoing P&A work for KPK that Marcom was helping support, and frankly, I didn't want them to be distracted from the CPA priority and that work slipping. So we've added Tasman to help with ensuring that we're not pulling resources away from the CPA priorities. We've also added the services of Campos EPC. They've been tasked with the flow line integrity evaluation, as well as the flow line management plan or integrity plan. But we've also asked them to help us in developing field pressure testing, which will be part of the field testing, but also some oversight, such that we develop some good best practices for when we're reactivating out of service lines due to spills or releases. We've also added Lujan Trucking. That was a gap we saw pretty early on with regard to our own resources for trucking and transportation that was precluding some more expeditious completion of our excavating activities and even backfilling. So we've added them as to try to help expedite some of our trucking and transportation needs. And then we've also added to our equipment just by way of getting what we can from Sunbelt. It's very challenging in these days to even lease equipment, but what we have been able to acquire through leasing with Sunbelt has helped augment, if you will, some of our own heavy equipment to minimize downtime due to maintenance and repairs. And then this touches on some of the improvements that we've made with regard to, again, excavation management, stormwater controls, as Kevin alluded to. We do, both Marcom, KPK, we do conduct inspections of our sites. Those inspections, as seen in the last bullet, are conducted using field survey forms as well as photos. And then also I know that the Oil and Gas Commission sends Nikki and Apex. They definitely inspect those sites as well. So there's lots of eyes on these sites at any one time. Our stockpile management, we've increased or enhanced, if you will, our berms, our signage, our BMPs associated with these to again try to mitigate some of the stormwater runoff and or access issues into these with some of our fencing and access controls. Weed management's also an issue that we've tried to enhance. It's challenging to keep up with, but we're doing as best we can to do that. And I think we're doing a decent job at keeping those weeds from migrating on these sites and spreading. I think it's the next slide, please. And so with this, I obviously need to touch on some of the new spills or releases and how we're handling those as well since I've been on board, but I went back to July 1, even though I started August 22nd. but since July 1, we've had 15 new spills or releases at KPK. 2 have been closed and addressed. 5 are in the closure process currently. 3 of those 5 were third-party line strikes, and 2 of the 15 were associated with P&A activities where we found impacted soils and submitted the Form 19 associated with a identified spill due to the P&A activities, and therefore they're under now Form 27 to clean up. And then 6 of the 15 are still actively being either remediated or in the assessment phase currently. Our response to spills and releases, I think we've demonstrated, if you will, that we've directed significant internal and external resources to address these impacts associated with new spills and releases, and our improvement with regard to process on our response to new spills and releases by way of collecting a characterization sample at the time of the initial response, I think is very significant in the fact that it will help speed up our closure process in the end. Marcom also helps with these new spills and releases as far as their support, and obviously provide the same level of technical oversight as they do for GRIP sites currently. We've made significant improvements in our initial and subsequent reporting with our forms and our backup documentation, and we're continuing to improve that to make it such that it's easier on staff to review and approve in a more timely fashion. I think with that, then I will turn it over to Kevin to speak about specific projects in progress.
Thanks, Greg. So I'll discuss specifically the 4 notice of alleged violation sites identified in the CPA, and just give a brief update on the other 48 sites in addition to those NOAV sites. Those 4 NOAV sites include the Grant Tank Battery, the Nesu Consolidation, Soil Spread Field, and the UPR 43 Pan Am G Consolidation Line. Next, please. First, I'll start with the Grant Tank Battery. I'm happy to report that the source removal is complete, that we've got that site into a groundwater monitoring program, and then we just installed hopefully our last off-site delineation well, showing that we have groundwater impacts fully defined and soil impacts defined. I submitted a site investigation report in our supplemental Form 27, providing significant information regarding the timeline of that response, and that the timeline of the release and overall response activities. That report also includes significant recommendations for excavation, backfilling, remedial pilot testing, and the continued groundwater investigation. That report's been submitted and is pending staff review and approval. Next. The Nesu Consolidation Line, we also submitted a supplemental Form 27 to present the data that we've collected up to August of this year. And then we've also been conducting site inspections at that site as access permits. It's flood irrigated, so we do what we can. But the adjacent photo shows the irrigation with the overall vegetative growth in the background there for the release. And then the data that we've collected so far indicates the source removal was effective, and we just need to conduct the additional investigation out there, hopefully to move that site towards closure. Soil Spread Field is another site. We're working on preparing an updated Form 27 to address previous conditions of approval identified in the other Form 27s. And as part of that, we conducted a site investigation and discovered some third-party trespassing, evidence of third-party trespassing and improper disposal of what appeared to be used motor oil. Notified KPK of that. They immediately addressed that by removing that source, and we communicated those findings to staff just to try to maintain some open communication and transparency with the activities that we're conducting at these sites. As a follow-up to that, we met with COGC reclamation staff, and they conducted an inspection aerial drone footage of that, showing a very strong native vegetation growth in that disturbed area, indicating that the overall activities out there to address that site have been very effective. We also have the UPR 43 Pan MG consolidation line release. That site has a groundwater monitoring program. Our data was provided in an updated Form 27. We're evaluating whether or not we need to continue our source removal activities, but we did have recommendations for additional soil sampling to continue that site investigation, and as well as continued groundwater monitoring. But all the data out there indicates that source removal activities, again, were very effective. Just a brief overall progress at the other GRIP sites. Kind of some metrics here. Since July 1, we've submitted 2 no further action requests for remediation project 16-197, which I believe was the McElwain number 44-17 produce water vessel closure, and then facility 447-185, which is a site up in the Walden area in the McCallum field up there. Also, since July 1st, we've been able to submit 76 Form 27s and 61 Form 19s. Some of those are for GRIP and non-GRIP related sites, but I think they're very strong indicators of the overall progress that we're making towards the significant compliance for these GRIP and non-GRIP sites. Our form submittals, we've been really trying to concentrate on providing substantial investigation data and recommendations for further action, not just procedural updates on those, but actually providing substantial information that staff can use in their review. And also, we've been paying particular attention to conditions of approval from previous approvals of other forms, including requests for weights, documentation, and updated schedules. I'm very pleased that KPK has been able to provide us significant disposal documentation, and that we can then convey that information to staff. Next slide, please. A few other sites that we've made some pretty significant progress. The upper center photo there shows the backfilled H. Hewitt excavation, showing that that's been graded back to grade. The weed control has been very effective out there, and then we continue our inspections just to make sure that everything looks good out there. We also have that site in a groundwater monitoring program, and again, the data indicates the source removal has been very effective. The upper right-hand photo there shows a picture of the Oxel Farms excavation. Again, it's receiving its regular inspections, and site access fencing and stuff have been well maintained out there. That site is currently in the groundwater investigation phase. We just installed some wells, and groundwater monitoring will be conducted very shortly as well. Another site where we've made significant progress in terms of source removal is the East Stiber site, shown in the bottom of the photograph there, showing that, again, that excavation's been backfilled. It's in a groundwater monitoring program. Analytical data indicates that source removals were effective. We do have some additional wells to be installed to address COAs, and we've obtained access from the property owner to continue that investigation. We should be able to get those wells installed very soon. In addition to the technical reporting and work that we've been doing, we've also been looking at a lot of our internal processes and making improvements in those. We've been able to provide project tracking data in the SharePoint that we've established, and can convey to KPK anytime that they need to look at it, and we need to have information available to them via the KPK client portal. We also have updated Form 19 and 27 tracking to make sure that we're able to catch up on our submittals, and stay current with the ones that are current, get caught up in the old ones, and just make sure that we can convey to staff that we're making an effort to get caught up on those forms. We're also providing technical reviews of all of our subcontractor deliverables, full QA/QC of laboratory reports, and groundwater monitoring reports that are delivered by other contractors. We also track our 48-hour sample notifications. So as part of the GRIP, there was a requirement to submit 48-hour sample notifications to staff. So we are able to submit those notifications and track those. And also, we have a lot of direct communication sometimes with Apex, the COGCC subcontractor for on-site contractor providing oversight of KPK activities out there. So we are able to communicate with them directly as needed. We've also been responding to staff concerns and comments about providing site-specific evaluations of metals concentrations in our background samples. We're getting have that process in place, and we look at those intently and make sure that the recommendations that we provide are substantiated by the data. We're also accommodating recent requirements that modifications to work scopes as required in a COA, for example, that they're in forms and not in emails. And we also are tracking the form approvals and provide regular updates to staff and request that those reviews be prioritized based on the criteria that we discussed earlier in terms of the risk rankings. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Craig, and he can discuss the improved collaboration with staff that we've all had.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And just for a check-in here, we got 4 slides left, so we're almost done. To just touch on, obviously, one of the gaps, collaboration, communication, coordination with COGCC was certainly a gap. I think we've enhanced that. I think there's always room for improvement anytime you're talking about communication. We've conducted a number of site meetings, if you will, with COGCC staff. Hope to continue that as their schedule allows for it. I think those are very productive to get on these sites and to kind of exchange thoughts, ideas on how to achieve closure and everybody's best interest here. We have weekly calls and meetings, or we're having those, especially on the flow line integrity piece with Campos and the integrity staff as we were working through the evaluation comments and then kicking off the integrity management plan. We have weekly meetings with Chair Robbins as well as the COGCC staff to update them on kind of what's going on, as well as them sharing any issues on their side as well. Our response to COAs in forms is something I think we're enhancing and doing better at with regard to our response in the form, whether it be Form 19s, 27s, and then follow up on inspection findings. We have a process in place for the inspections, whether it be our internal or external inspections where we're finding deficiencies to cure and correct those. We have weekly schedule updates that Marcom sends to Nikki and team with regard to field activities for the week, and that can include as well the 48-hour sample notifications. Kevin touched on just a minute ago, Nikki's ability and acceptance to prioritizing Form 27s or 19s that need to kind of float to the surface that are higher priorities. She's been very good and very amenable to turning those around in a very timely fashion, and we certainly appreciate that when we do communicate that. We obviously communicate informally via email and text on site status on a periodic basis with COGCC staff to try to, again, provide those updates that I think are value added. Next slide. This next slide touches on Rogers specifically, and some of it we've already talked about, so I don't want to go into too much more detail, but certainly the photo, I think, speaks volumes with regard to the size of the excavation. You can see the fencing that is there as well. The smaller photo on the right was a bell hole associated with the hydrovac activities there as well, but again illustrates kind of the site fencing and the measures taken there. As was previously mentioned, the site investigation and remediation were completed or successful based upon sample collection and closure samples taken. The access controls and signage to a certain extent set somewhat of a new standard just by way of the amount of fencing that we did have up, but I think was appropriate considering the sensitivity of the area. This was very much a high priority for KPK and the commission, and we still hold it as such, and will move expeditiously to get it backfilled here as we just receive the conditional approval to backfill on October 17th. So we're addressing a couple COAs associated with that. Once those are addressed, we will be actively backfilling. And so with that, I'll turn it over to John to wrap up.
Thanks, Craig. So the path forward under the CPA from this point, we're certainly not perfect, but I think you can see that KPK is committed to continuous improvement in our ongoing activities, our form submissions, our communication with staff to achieve more site closures, and overall compliance improvements with the CPA and with COGCC rules more generally. We're working hard to close the excavation sites identified as candidates for closure, but for some background metals issues and other technical issues to be resolved with staff, and we're working very hard on those. We continue to devote all available KPK resources and bring on additional contractor resources, as you heard from Craig, to optimize our performance under the CPA. And Craig Meese's fresh perspective of this work and deep experience is a great asset that will help us make continuous improvements moving forward. Next slide. So in conclusion, Marcom and KPK have dedicated all available resources to achieve compliance and have made significant progress. Those site closures need to increase, and we believe are poised to do so. Marcom and KPK have made significant improvements to overall project management, form submission, spill and release reporting and compliance with COGCC rules, and we expect that improvement to continue over the term of the CPA. Marcom and KPK will continue to engage staff as appropriate to address its concerns, seek guidance, and build trust and a collaborative working relationship as we implement the CPA through its 5-year term. That concludes our presentation. We'd welcome questions now or after a responsive presentation from staff, or both.
Let me unmute. Let's stop the screen share if we could. Commissioner Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I wanted to ask a couple quick questions based on some of what we saw. First, I'd like to touch base on the Rogers site that was the subject of the public comment. You had mentioned earlier on in response to the public comment that you had tried to talk to the developer. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, and we did talk to the developer. John Lee is his name with Windham Hill. We actually met him on site. Jeffrey Kaufman met him on site.
Okay. And are there still homes being built in that development as well?
That I don't know, to be honest, not certainly in proximity to where this location is at. There could be another phase to, say, the southeast, but I really can't speak to that. I don't know. Not
Okay.
certainly in proximity to this site.
Okay. And one of the things that you had, I believe it was Lujan Trucking, was
Yeah.
one of some additional trucking that you've done. Was the addition of Lujan Trucking in response to some of the comments received on the waste management plan that you had submitted?
No, not at all. It was just simply we were lacking trucking resources. Rogers was one. Nikki could speak to this. You know, we would have maybe one truck that could haul soil, and we needed additional trucks to help expedite the excavation activities. And so we were just stretched thin on our existing resources and needed to pull in additional because the trucking aspect was kind of a bottleneck that we needed to cure.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions for now.
Unmute. Commissioners, I'm sort of in favor of listening to staff before we launch into questions, but if folks have questions, we can certainly launch into them now. What is your preference? All right, seeing no one jump up and down, I'm going to say perhaps we could listen to staff in their response. And Ms. Stafford, not to put you on the spot, but I'm sure you're going to do this anyway. I would be interested in staff's perception on the conclusions that Mr. Jacobs just mentioned, that indeed, that whether there's been continuous improvement, whether staff believes there's a devotion of all KPK resources more on board, perspective on bringing Mr. Fred.
Chair Robbins, I'm sorry, you're kind of cutting in and out.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying that if you could weave into your analysis or your presentation some aspects of staff's perspectives of the 4 or 5 conclusions that KPK came to, I think that would be helpful to the commission.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. We can certainly do that. Could we potentially take just a 5-minute break to ensure that we have that fully incorporated?
Yeah, sure. Let's take 10, and we'll call it our morning break and come back at 10:22.
Thank you.
As we're showing back up, AAG Stafford, did you have sufficient time to adequately get prepared?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I appreciate it.
Okay. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I see all 6 commissioners with us. Mr. Jacobs and Mr. Meese are with us. So, Ms. Stafford, I believe the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just to begin, could we also elevate Mr. Greg Duranlo to a panelist while I'm speaking? Thank you. Okay. Good morning, commissioners. For the record, I am Assistant Attorney General Caitlin Stafford, and I'm counsel to commission staff in this matter involving KPK. I have some brief remarks before I turn the presentation over to Nikki Graber, DJ Basin Environmental Supervisor, and Greg Duranlo, Environmental Manager. Ms. Graber, first and foremost, has been in charge of managing the compliance plan agreement's implementation almost from its inception. You heard a fairly subdued presentation from KPK, where they tried to sell you on improved form submittals and increased communication as progress. You are about to hear a very different perspective from staff, with visual support of conditions on the ground. As Ms. Graber will discuss, there is a big difference between KPK's claims of progress and our observations of the lack thereof through drone imagery of certain sites. Now, before I get into things, I want to briefly remind you how we got here. Following the issuance of several NOAVs between 2019 and 2021, and the Director's 901A order in April 2021, the Commission convened an enforcement hearing to adjudicate numerous violations alleged against KPK related to spill reporting, waste management, and impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. And at the conclusion of that enforcement hearing, the Commission found that KPK had committed 22 separate violations of COGCC rules and engaged in a pattern of violations. And it assessed a total penalty of just over $2 million. And instead of imposing the full penalty, the Commission ordered KPK to pay $795,000 on a payment schedule that would maximize KPK's ability to fund remediation, corrective actions, and compliance. On November 5th, 2021, following negotiations between the parties, the CPA became effective, requiring KPK to commit to compliance, to commit to certain corrective actions, and the implementation of several plans in order to achieve both closure of numerous aging spill release and remediation projects, and to commit to compliance with this Commission's rules. In June, the Commission held the compliance hearing and determined that KPK had not substantially complied with portions of Section 4 of the CPA related to closure of certain NOAV sites and the GRIP and the waste management and spill release reporting and training plans. This represents the 4th opportunity staff has had to present to the full Commission to talk about staff's assessment of KPK's performance to date under the Compliance Plan Agreement, or CPA for short. Staff previously provided its perspective to you on January 5th, May 4th, and during the compliance hearing that commenced on June 22nd of this year. Today, much like our past presentations, staff plans to provide its assessment of CPA performance to this point. And again, like previous presentations, staff will focus on progress of on-site work and the implementation of various plans provided for by the CPA. The plan implementation piece of this discussion will necessarily involve examples that implicate more recent reports and incidents in the field, including the issuance of a second 901A order related to the Rogers Spill site, the site that the public commenter earlier today discussed with you. Now, before Ms. Graver begins, I want to point out that we are coming up on a year since the CPA was mutually agreed to by both KPK and staff and approved by the commission. I want to remind the commission of the purpose of the CPA. For KPK to attain closure of remediation projects that were the subject of last year's enforcement hearing, and for KPK to attain compliance with the commission's rules, including attaining closure of open spill and remediation projects. On behalf of staff, I'd like to share a few takeaways, much of which has been discussed at length during the weekly meetings that began following June's compliance hearing. And very briefly, I'd like to share my screen and put up the last slide that KPK shared with you about its conclusions. Please let me know if you cannot see that.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, sorry, I phrased that wrong. Now you'll see the conclusions that KPK has drawn, and Ms. Graver and Mr. Duranlo will go into this more in their presentation, but I think this ties very well into my overarching view on staff's behalf. Now, first, staff has seen inconsistent implementation of the plans under the CPA. And here I'm talking about the waste and spill plans and also the GRIP. To be fair, there have been some improvements. In their presentation before you today, KPK told you of their new hires, of the close work they're doing with contractors that are required by the CPA, and of KPK's perceived limitations that have impeded their progress on work required under the CPA. But as you will hear from staff has worked diligently, gone above and beyond to work with KPK on prioritizing site work and on essentially generating KPK's work plans. But consistent implementation of the plans required by the CPA remains to be seen. For example, with the spill plan, staff is still not receiving necessary information regarding recent spills, which in turn puts an unsustainable burden on staff resources as they have to acquire accurate information by other means. And KPK's inconsistent implementation of the plans aimed at achieving compliance leads into a second piece: staff's increasingly diminished trust in KPK's ability to conduct its oil and gas operations in a responsible manner in the state of Colorado. During last year's enforcement hearing, staff told this commission it had lost trust in KPK to operate in a manner that is protective of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. Staff is still seeing issues with KPK following through on the schedule set forth in work plans, with spill reporting that accurately reflects the conditions on the ground, and in some cases, with unsafe work practices occurring on site. Finally, staff's biggest takeaway here is that it's clear that a lot of work remains for KPK. And we're not just talking about physical work on site at open attachment A projects. The attachment A projects, for which the CPA and its various subplans were supposed to serve as tools for KPK to utilize to achieve closure, have now turned into a seemingly insurmountable backlog of remediation and spill projects. In June, recall I told you that KPK has only achieved closure at 2 of the 58 remediation projects on attachment A. That number remains the same today, as KPK has not achieved closure on an attachment A remediation project since December of last year. Why has this number remained unchanged? Largely due to new spill and release issues that pull KPK's admittedly limited resources away from dealing with attachment A projects. To be fair, they told you via slide 15 of their presentation that only half of their crews are dedicated to their ever-increasing list of remediation projects. Then later at the conclusion, they told you that all available resources were dedicated. This lack of dedication to these projects leaves projects to age, to degrade, and compounds public concern about these projects, as demonstrated by the complaints COGCC has received from the public over the past year. Recall in June, we showed you examples of where staff thought KPK's site management practices were improving. Now those same sites bear telltale signs of neglect. Staff is not here to say that KPK has accomplished nothing since the effective date of the CPA, but it remains unclear to staff how KPK will ever achieve compliance with the CPA and this commission's rules when they cannot or will not acquire, dedicate, and deploy the resources necessary to address and achieve closure on each NOAB site and on each attachment A site, when they cannot seem to dig themselves out. And now I will turn this over to Ms. Graver.
I'm just going to share my screen real quick. All right, can everybody see this?
Yes.
Thank you. Hello, Commissioners. I'm Nikki Graber, the KPK Project Manager and the DJ Basin Region Environmental Supervisor. Today, I will review the Comprehensive Waste Management Plan and Spill Release Training, Reporting and Training Plan required by the CPA. And then we will examine how those plans have been implemented by KPK. After that, I will review GRIP implementation and progress made at high priority sites. I will finish with a review of recent complaints related to KPK sites. After that, Greg Duranla will follow up with some closing remarks. To begin, I would like to update you on the progress with the Comprehensive Waste Management Plan. Per the CPA, the plan requires that KPK detail how they will characterize, manage, dispose, and transport all types of waste generated from its operations. In June, staff returned the review plan to KPK with significant comments. A revised plan was submitted on August 11th. However, based on staff's review, many of these comments remain unaddressed. These unaddressed comments include improper characterization of hazardous waste as a non-hazardous waste and entirely missing appendices. Thus, the plan was not approved. To date, staff has reviewed and provided detailed comments on this plan 3 times. Staff was unsure on how to proceed and brought the question to Chair Robbins, who instructed KPK to review the missing documentation. In the field, waste management in the form of stockpiles of oily waste remains a frequently utilized practice. While that practice has generally improved and we are seeing inadequate controls less frequently, we are starting to see that the previously installed controls are deteriorating due to lack of maintenance. For instance, last hearing we looked at the Music McClintock as a good example of stockpile management. Now, due to neglect, it has become a nuisance for surrounding properties due to weed proliferation, and the stockpile is sloughing over the unmaintained controls. This shows that KPK simply doesn't have enough resources dedicated to site cleanup and maintenance. Other examples include high-profile spills that had only 1 truck dedicated to E&P waste removal, and the fact that the Jackson County assets are limited to source removal because one truck per week is being dedicated to waste removal. That's generously 12 cubic yards per week. That's 624 cubic yards a year. And at that rate, it would take nearly 5 years to dispose of the amount of soil removed from Grant Tank Battery. With the multitude of remediations pending across the state, this simply isn't enough. Additionally, per section 4.2 of the Waste Management Plan, stockpiles will be stored on site for a limited amount of time, e.g. less than 1 month. This simply isn't feasible with the amount of resources dedicated to waste removal. Additionally, waste manifests remain missing or incomplete for multiple locations, which I will discuss further under Form 27 reporting. The spill reporting plan has followed a similar trajectory as the waste management plan. However, the revised plan submitted by KPK on August 11th had staff's comments incorporated and was deemed adequate. Staff has expected to see an overall improvement in the compliance with spill reporting once CPA was signed. KPK has had 15 spills since the June hearing, bringing the total new spills since the CPA was signed to 39. And while there have been some improvements to reporting process, we are still seeing multiple issues, including reports of gas-only spills that, upon inspection or video from emergency responders, have released fluids. Several complaints have been filed in the public comment today, alleging that local government designees and landowners are not getting a proper notification or consult. And we are continuing to see missed deadlines for Form 19s, with 1 initial report and 5 supplemental reports missed since June. It is important to note here that we simply don't see these types of consistent errors with other operators. Let's take a dive into reporting issues that demonstrate KPK isn't following either their rules or their own spill reporting plan. First, let's look at the Peak Montoya and the Greeley National Bank, both of which happened over the weekend of September 17th, and both of which required emergency personnel to respond to the scene. Initial email reports from KPK on the Peak Montoya reported the leak was gas only. The video you are seeing was provided to staff by the fire department, where fluids can be seen coming out of the release point. Clearly, the spill was not gas only. Had KPK been following proper reporting, Staff wouldn't have had to rely on emergency responders to relay actual site conditions. Since spill discovery, work conducted at the site has opened an excavation of approximately 12 feet by 16 feet by 8 feet, and KPK has determined that there were 4 holes in the top of the flow line. As you can see from the photo of the excavator with a pile of contaminated soil in it, KPK is indeed direct loading. However, they're only doing so after they stage the soil on the ground. This is a path that you can take, but it's not in compliance with their waste management plan. Also discovered on the weekend of September 17th and requiring response from the fire department is the Greeley National Bank. That video is pretty short. I'm going to restart it for you. Based on initial Form 19, staff assumed that it was caused by a line strike. However, based on the video from the fire department, staff is still unsure as to the relevance of the reported trench. Again, the reports to COGCC don't actually match site conditions, and staff is again forced to review information provided by emergency responders for an initial on-site assessment. As of October 7th, our last inspection of this location, the excavation measured approximately 80 feet by 60 feet by 16 feet deep, and gross free product has been observed on infiltrating groundwater. Vertical and lateral extents remain undefined, and soil probing has been proposed and approved. Completion of this spill is awaiting sampling and reporting. Another recent flow line spill that demonstrates to staff that KPK is not adequately implementing the spill release plan is the UPRR 43 Pan Am I number 23, which is located near the Colorado National Speedway. Verbal and written reports by KPK the day of the incident indicated that the spill was discovered in an area where they didn't expect one of their flow lines to be located. In fact, it was approximately 600 feet from where they thought the line was. Thus, field crews reportedly pressurized the lines individually to determine which line caused the leak. This effectively caused a secondary release. Per their spill reporting plan and Rule 912A1, operators shall immediately, upon discovery, control and contain spills, not utilize fluids to repressurize and release more. The excavation is approximately 152 feet by 109 feet by 8 feet deep. The site is currently fenced with no excavation crews or equipment on location, and vertical and lateral extents are undefined in reporting. From what staff can tell, KPK only appears to be opening holes and removing their equipment. Why? Because as KPK has consistently told this commission, it doesn't have the manpower, equipment, or overall resources to devote to each open spill and remediation and their daily operations. While the 3 previously discussed spills present significant threat to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources, and that threat should in no way be downplayed, no recent spill is as concerning as the Rogers No. 1 flow line. In areas such as this, reporting and coordination and waste management issues are all amplified. This spill, which daylighted to surface and was discovered by a neighbor, and again reported to the fire department requiring emergency response. The spill is located in a highly sensitive area, as you can see from this video from COGCC drone imagery. It is approximately 30 feet from a home within a high density residential neighborhood, directly adjacent to a developed walking path, which connects the neighborhood to an elementary school. It is also directly adjacent to a Weld County road. KPK's initial response was limited to hydrovac and flow line repair. During this time, limited site controls were installed, despite multiple conversations between COGCC and KPK. And a complainant reported, as you heard earlier, kids were playing within the bellhole excavations. Additionally, county and surface owner communications are reportedly inadequate based on complaints we have received. A 901A order was issued here due to public health and safety concerns, and only then did KPK engage in environmental cleanup. An excavator had been on location for several days, but had previously been dedicated to flow line repair. This can be seen in COGCC drone imagery from August 17th. This is 5 days after spill discovery. Note the excavator is on location and only limited work has been done utilizing a hydrovac. On August 15th, KPK missed the 10-day reporting deadline for this spill. The excavator remained on location but was engaged in flow line repair until notice of the 901A order was issued on August 29th. That's 18 days after spill discovery. During this time, staff reiterated that work on this spill should be KPK's highest priority. The spill, which was initially characterized as minor by KPK, now measures 102 feet by 34 feet by 15 feet, and again is 30 feet away from homes. The site was conditionally approved for backfill on Monday, 66 days after discovery. As of today, KPK is waiting on Rogue County right-of-way permit to begin backfill. It is important to note KPK did not submit the permit application until this week, even though staff applied a condition of approval to obtain and approve a traffic plan in a Form 19 approved on August 30th, 48 days before KPK submitted their permit. The requirement for a permit was reiterated by staff several times in the field, and these delays are avoidable, and a competent operator would be a non-issue. With the understanding that KPK's limited equipment has been engaged in mitigating threats caused by these new spills, we need to examine the impacts this causes to the backlog of incidents in the GRIP. Since the CPA was signed, KPK has now recorded 39 new spills and obtained no further action on 3. Again, 3. Please keep in mind, there is a distinction between no further action and closed. A spill is an incident that requires an immediate response. And per Rule 912B6, that immediate response should take no longer than 90 days. This is all captured in a Form 19. On the other hand, a remediation is a complex cleanup that requires site investigation and work plans. This is all captured within a Form 27. A spill can be, and frequently is, transitioned to a remediation. KPK has indeed transitioned 29 of their spills to remediations because either the incidents were complex enough to need a work plan or KPK did not complete the work at the spill location within 90 days. As of today, 20 of KPK Form 19s remain open over 90 days and out of compliance with Rule 912B6. We have to ask ourselves, why are so many KPK spills remaining open past 90 days? It's because either no form has been submitted or the submittals are completely inadequate and COGCC is unable to resolve the Form 19. Staff is spending a significant amount of time and energy reviewing previous submissions and reiterating previously applied COAs. All of this would have been addressed if KPK were following their spill release training plan and their 900 series rules. Moving on to remediations, as Ms. Stafford said, only 2 projects have received no further action. Let me go ahead and restate that again. Only 2 GRIP remediation projects are complete. In that time, 24 remediation projects have been opened. Now, to be fair, remediations are complex and take time, particularly when they have entered the groundwater remediation stage. But the source removal and definition of impacts should happen relatively quickly. And we have seen some progress at a select number of sites. For example, the Martin J. Schaefer has been backfilled, monitoring wells are installed, and a reclamation plan is progressing. However, we can contrast to the spill that occurred during pipeline repair for this incident, the Martin Schaefer consolidation line, which has had an open excavation with EMP waste stored on location so long that the landowners filled it in themselves with the contaminated soil. The projects, which were granted emergency backfill to accommodate the start of agriculture this spring with the promise of additional mining wells to define and work plans to address impacts remaining in situ. That work remains incomplete and unscheduled. The Form 27 remediation work plans we are seeing from KPK continue to be inadequate. Issues observed include mistakes to analytical reports, attachments missing or corrupt, sample points missing, and other issues which present an inaccurate or incomplete record of work conducted at the site. This creates a significant burden to staff to either A, return the inadequate form to draft and provide detailed comments to KPK, or B, in the interest of keeping KPK moving forward, crafting COAs that effectively write a work order. This puts staff in a predicament of having to be prescriptive, something we rarely do, as we shouldn't have to effectively be the operator's consultant. Many of these forms have had to be returned to draft multiple times because the provided comments were not addressed. In addition, we are seeing a concerning trend surrounding the waste manifest. As you can see from the above snippet from the Stromquist spill, the waste manifests are largely incomplete. They are missing the address where the waste originated, the name and signature of the generator or authorized agent, the name, signature, and date of the transporter, and the name, signature, and date of the receipt of the disposal facility. This is effectively every piece of data that documents proper disposal. Proper documentation of waste disposal was covered in the waste management plan, but is not actually being implemented on many of these sites. And as a note, I would like to point out that the Stromquist form had to be returned to draft 4 times until staff ultimately corrected the problem for KPK. Looking specifically at GRIP sites, we can see that of the 74 incidents listed on attachment A, 40 are past due on quarterly reporting and 20 are past due on 90-day spill reporting. Additionally, 15 sites haven't received any updates since the CPA was signed 319 days ago. Per GRIP section 6.2, this should have been completed by March 31st, and these are now 203 days past due. Marcom has done a good job of coordinating with COGCC to prioritize the list of Form 27s to be approved, which allows for field prioritization. You can think of this kind of like the express lane on I-25. Forms that are submitted are then and are returned to draft are then bumped back into that queue once resubmitted, sometimes as many as 4 times in order for KPK to be able to keep field schedules. All this being said, moving forms repeatedly to the top of the queue requires other forms to be pushed down. This, coupled with the inadequacy of work plans, is why there are so many older forms in the queue. The attention to prioritizing KPK is also negatively affecting other operators' review times. Staff met with both KPK and Marcom to discuss insufficient reporting on many of these projects. We developed a lengthy slideshow and provided extensive details on expectations. After the meeting, staff conducted a cursory review of all the forms in process that had these errors and returned them to draft to allow for corrections. A quintessential example of the amount of time COGCC is spending on attempts to bolster KPK into compliance is the SAC unit. The initial work began without COGCC approval, and in fact, inspectors discovered KPK working while making a right onto Highway 7 from York. These 5 remediations have conservatively required over 100 hours of staff time. This includes the creation of a detailed spreadsheet with associated color-coded maps, which were provided to KPK during a site visit, and a safety stand-down conducted by a COGCC EPS due to unsafe working conditions on a separate site visit. The reporting was actually so erroneous that several of the forms had to be closed out and reopened under new projects to accurately clear up the record. As of now, multiple spills are aging and open. Excavations sit idle. Backfilled excavations will need to be investigated as they are missing any of the documentation required under Rule 911. COGCC and county inspectors also observed a concrete produced water vault broken up at the bottom of a now backfilled excavation. And it is unclear if the water vault was buried on location, potentially violating Rule 606D2. KPK has not provided documentation of proper disposal of this vault, despite multiple requests and COAs. Of the 28 sites KPK identified in the GRIP as high priority, only 15 of these sites have actually seen any progress or work done on location. This number includes 6 sites where only soil borings have been conducted or monitoring wells have been installed. Due to the concerns during the last hearing, you requested staff to assist KPK in prioritizing their work via Thursday meetings with Chair Robbins. In order to quantitatively rank these projects, staff dedicated a significant amount of time to review the GRIP listed high priority sites and coupled this with an empirical priority ranking system. Staff input about 20 of these sites that passed the quote unquote gut check for high and mid priority to test the calculation, and asked KPK to input the rest of the information to facilitate the Commission's request for prioritization. The deadline to input that information was missed twice with no request for an extension. The sheet remains incomplete to this day and was last opened by KPK on September 20th, indicating to staff that they are not utilizing this tool, which staff sees as essential to completing your request for prioritization. All that I have discussed with you so far could be characterized as merely paperwork. So now let's turn and take a look and see how this is reflected on the ground and what we are seeing in the field. Starting with the grant NOAV location, which is listed as number 2 on the COGCC ranking sheet as input by COGCC staff and is a high priority within the GRIP. The first spill at the Grant Tank Battery was reported via a complaint on October 30th, 2018. That's 1,451 days, or 3 years, 11 months, 20 days, or 11 starting Bronco quarterbacks. In that length of time, only 3,065 cubic yards have been removed, or maybe 2,780. The most recent report contradicts previous reports. The most recent Form 27 submitted for grant was listed for fast track review, but had been returned to draft twice for missing or soil and groundwater analytical data, errors in analytical summary table, inconsistencies with the numbers of samples collected, and missing boring logs. Additionally, contradictory to what KPK indicated in their slide on the grant, KPK has yet to define soil impacts vertically pH exceedances and horizontally organic exceedances, despite claiming delineation has been retrieved. Groundwater impacts have also not been delineated. And additionally, the proposed monitoring wells were deemed inadequate to determine point of compliance for the in-situ remediation. Here you can see site changes that have occurred since the spill excavation began. Now, almost a year after discovery, only a small excavation had been conducted around the produced water tank to the far west, and that very little progress has been made since June 2021 Google Earth imagery. The excavation, unused equipment, and weeds have all been subject to multiple complaints. Keep in mind that elementary school children walk past this location every day. Another NOAV location, the Nesu consolidation, was ranked as high on the GRIP and has yet to be input by KPK into the COGCC ranking system. The spill is 851 days old. The location is in the middle of the landowner's crop outland and has been impacting the 2020 through 2022 growing seasons. As you can see, little to no progress, except maybe weed growth, has happened in that time. There's a form and process for this spill, but has never been included on the priority list sent by KPK. Another NIFE site, the unpermitted soil spread field on KPK's property, which, if you remember, was only brought to COGCC's attention by an anonymous complaint, has been open over 800 days. It is listed as a high priority in the GRIP and is also missing input from KPK on the COGCC ranking system. The last approved Form 27 we have, it was 285 days ago. In a recent Thursday meeting, site progress at this location was presented to COGCC, favorably comparing reclamation at this location to a neglected horse pasture. Drone imagery from just a few days ago shows that's pretty much what it looks like. The reclamation imagery on the far right is the plant health, and it's easy to discern where the unpermitted waste disposal occurred. Here you can see an aerial imagery documenting the lack of progress at the UPRR 43 Pan Am G consolidation number 2. This is the near miss NOAV, which has been open 760 days. The site is listed as number 1 on the COGCC ranking and is a high priority in the GRIP. Please note COGCC input the site into the ranking system as part of testing. The excavation is directly adjacent to a county road and 185 feet from a house. And the landowner has expressed frustration and safety concerns. He reported to staff that his 3-year-old nephew was playing at the edge of the water-filled excavation on Easter Sunday. KPK has not provided an adequate background determination, and no analytical has been submitted for additional sidewall sampling. This incident was passed due for quarterly reporting, and a Form 27 was submitted yesterday. Commissioners, if you remember at the last hearing, we discussed the Morgan A number 1 as a high priority site and a threat to public safety. The spill was reported 370 days ago. It's actually located in the same subdivision as the Rogers spill, which we discussed earlier. COGC staff has continuously expressed concern over the slow progress at the site and lack of site controls in such a sensitive area. Despite receiving insufficient information via a Form 27, staff was able to look at the raw data and conduct our own statistical analysis and determine that KPK could request backfill and transition to a reclamation plan. On September 1st, during a Thursday meeting, COGCC allowed backfill of the Morgan A number 1 excavation due to public health and safety concerns. It was expressed to KPK that they should make this form a priority and present the proper statistical analysis. That form remains outstanding. Staff is doing everything in our power to expedite the work and negate the threat to public safety presented by these sites. However, KPK has continued to delay reporting and progress. Another high priority GRIP site that was ranked by the COGCC at number 4 during our testing of the sheet is UPRR 43 Pan Am I-5. It is 150 feet from multiple residences. In the last hearing, we discussed this location as having site control and stormwater issues. The site remains open and the previously documented issues remain. The site is behind on quarterly reporting and COGCC has not received an update with the results of the soil sampling conducted in May. A site that has actually seen a lot of progress in the field is the premium turkey farm. The site is listed as high priority in the GRIP, and KPK omitted relevant information that would allow it to be ranked in the COGCC ranking sheet. The excavation is currently approximately 135 feet by 80 feet by 20 feet and is obvious visible hydrocarbon impacts remain present on the floor and the sidewalls. A split sample by staff for the floor sample reported total petroleum hydrocarbon concentration at 21,390 milligrams per kilogram. Please keep in mind that table 915-1 limit is 500 milligrams per kilogram. At last inspection, no excavation equipment or crews were on site. All this progress being said, the last submittal for this site was in May of this year, so we are in the dark on the data surrounding the work done. Another aging excavation is the facility number 7. It is listed as a GRIP high priority and is listed as number 15 as ranked by COGCC staff. Like many other KPK excavations, the hole has been open so long it is visible in Google Earth. The excavation is currently 220 feet by 80 feet by 25 feet deep, and staff has received numerous requests for information from the landowner who reports that the location has been noticed for eminent domain. Again, the last Form 27 for this location was received in May. Gross free product has been continuously observed at the Coslet A9 since December of 2020. The spill was discovered 708 days and no environmental data has been received to date. This incident is also listed as a GRIP high priority and is number 11 as ranked by staff. Staff has inspected the location for every month and observed no remedial activity since the initial excavation was open. A Form 27 proposing monitoring wells was only recently received on August 30th, 658 days after discovery of the spill. The very first samples for this incident were finally collected on September 14th, 745 days after discovery. While I would like to take a deep dive into all of these sites, I understand the time is limited, so I would like to provide a brief overview of several more sites that are listed as high priority. First, we can look at the north, which has had 2 spills, the first of which occurred 1,302 days ago. It is directly adjacent to the Frederick High School, and work has been proposed for the last several school breaks, but to date, the impacts in situ have not been addressed. Point of compliance remains undefined. However, an additional monitoring well was installed on Friday. The Suckla Brown has been open 748 days. Soil borings were initially conducted in July of 2021, and results of this investigation have not been to staff. Additional soil borings were finally conducted late last month, and per our oversight, they still didn't define the extent of visual and olfactory impacts. 3 spills have been discovered at the Paul Hines location since 2018. This location is within 1,600 feet from an active bald eagle nest and 100 feet away from multiple wetlands, which connect to surface water less than 1,100 feet from known impacts. As stated during the June presentation, free product was observed on groundwater within the open excavation for more than 5 months. Soil and groundwater impacts remain undefined. The Stiber and Hewitt both discussed as progress in the last hearing, despite KPK claiming source removal was effective. Both sites have impacts remaining in situ, and both were granted emergency backfill this spring to accommodate irrigation. KPK committed to the installation of soil borings and in situ remediation to define and remediate these impacts. No work has been conducted or scheduled at either location to date. And as a side note, an additional spill has been reported at the same property as the Stiber, bringing the incident count to 5 on this one farm. The Doversberger and Yoxel are both adjacent to surface water, and both have seen no source excavation. As we discussed in the last hearing, the excavation at Doversberger has been promised during the irrigation off-season of 2019, 2020, 2021. And now, as we approach the 2022 off-season, no work has been reported to allow for an expedited excavation within this irrigation canal. At the Yoxel, additional wells were installed last week and point of compliance has not been defined to date. The Lawrence Totems is located adjacent to a wetland and the Colorado Boulevard. The location has impacts in contact with groundwater and an open excavation within the Colorado Boulevard right-of-way. The site is 849 days old. Vertical and lateral extent of impacts have not been defined, and sidewall samples demonstrate organic exceedances. The Hawaii sites, both of which have been open 400 days, and the landowners have expressed frustration via multiple complaints. No work has been scheduled at either of these sites. The Cary Walking site is listed as number 10 on the COGCC site, despite not having a Form 20 submitted since before the CPA was signed. The header is one of many locations that have been completely ignored when inputting into the priority ranking sheet. With so many sites showing so little progress, how is this affecting the public? Since June 1st, KPK has been the subject of 8 official environmental complaints and more than a dozen unofficial complainants who are regularly contacting environmental staff. These complainants include landowners, developers, local offices of emergency management, local government officials, and other operators. This count includes 2 more complaints with safety concerns about the Grant Tank Battery, the open excavation, and its close proximity to an elementary school. A disturbing complaint at the heart alleges the landowner and found in KPK a spill on their property. Per the landowner, KPK responded, excavated a hole, which immediately filled with oil and then never returned. This complaint was the first staff knew of the spill. 6 months after the landowner reportedly notified KPK. This is clearly out of compliance with Rule 912B1, which requires 24-hour notice to staff. Subsequent investigation by KPK in the area have confirmed impacts.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I apologize, but we were told this was a 30-minute allotment. We stuck to our 30 minutes. We're on 45, I think, for staff. Are we about done? And do we get a chance to respond to some of these allegations?
I will allow staff to continue and to proceed forward, and I'll certainly give you sufficient time to respond.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chair.
If I might, just for a second, interrupt here. This presentation that we've gone through originally did time out at around 30 minutes. So we endeavored to keep in the allotted time. I just want to put that on the record.
That's fine.
I apologize. I'm fighting a bit of a cold, so I'm struggle busting over here. So sorry. As discussed previously, COGCC has also received multiple complaints citing safety concerns and lack of communication by KPK at the Rogers 1. In conversations with staff, this complaint and reporting having to chase kids out of the initial bell hole created as part of KPK's response. The most recent complaint filed by the Rogers was submitted by the HOA treasurer of Windham Hill. Once again, the complaint cites safety concerns regarding the open excavation and proximity of houses, as well as a lack of communication by KPK. It's easy to understand frustration and fear expressed here, as I'm sure you've seen in the second 901A order, and as you heard in the public comment this morning. Additionally, KPK worker safety has been the cause of a safety stand down conducted by staff, and soil stockpiles were observed in the Will County right-of-way, despite no traffic permit. And strong hydrocarbon odors were observed and documented by inspectors on the path and nearby adjacent homes for several weeks. A complaint of the 12 Amico Charter Schneider discussed general lack of activity and site maintenance and reports that KPK has blamed the COGCC for lack of progress at this location. A narrative we have unfortunately received from multiple members of the public. To date, KPK has done no excavation beyond initial surface scraping, performed no investigation, and has collected no soil samples at this location. A further complaint was submitted by the Fort Lupton Fire Protection District, the landowner for the George Norton consolidation spill, which was originally discovered by COGCC inspectors on April 29th, 2021, 538 days ago. The complaint reports failure to notify landowner when the spill occurred. This despite the fact that KPK reported on the initial Form 19 that they had informed the landowner. The complaint also alleges failure to notify and communicate with the fire district when the excavation occurred. They also expressed concerns regarding the amount of time that has passed before the remediation began. Commissioners, this slide was pulled directly from the June hearing, and I think it's important to revisit here. Staff has time and again urged, communicated, and frankly bent over backwards to try to foster KPK into compliance. All the stepping stones we have built have either been ignored or kicked over. Tools built such as the ranking system have been neglected, and yet again, they continue to do the bare minimum while declaring they are committed to a wholehearted change of culture. The truth came out at the Rogers, where they again prioritized production over cleanup. At the heart, where when COGCC wasn't looking, an oil field hole was ignored and unreported. And at the Grant, where 1,400 days after a spill was discovered, an open hole remains next to a high traffic area and a thoroughfare for elementary school kids. As a former commissioner observed at the conclusion of June's compliance hearing, compliance with the rule is the baseline. We're not handing out the most improved operator trophy here. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Greg Duramo quickly. We will both be available to answer any questions after his comments.
Thank you, Nikki. Commissioners, I recognize that we are a little over time, and I appreciate your indulgence. I have about 5 minutes of remarks, primarily related to our staff resources. Nikki, we don't need a slide up for this. Just listening to Nikki is frankly exhausting, and it's hard to articulate the amount of time and energy that staff has dedicated to fostering KPK's return to compliance. And as you've heard, staff are frustrated with the progress. Our primary team working on this includes myself, Nikki Graber, obviously, Kari Brown, Chris Canfield, Laurel Anderson, and Alex Amadian, both of whom we recently hired from a contractor, Apex, who's been contracted specifically to support our efforts with oversight of KPK's compliance plan implementation. As you may know, John Axelson recently retired, but was also integral to the execution of the CPA. Alex Fisher and Chris Nidell on the West Slope are involved in the Jackson County asset work. These staff members are not uniquely assigned to KPK work. They each have regional assignments with numerous other oil and gas operators who have priority work of their own. KPK represents approximately 10% of the total number of forms here in the DJ Basin team's work area, but based on my discussions with staff, this work takes up about 80% of their time. You've heard from Nikki many reasons for this. Most significantly, improper reporting, incomplete reporting, untimely reporting, incomplete plans and submittals, missing data and information, incorrect information. All of this takes additional time to process individual forms. But our experience continues to be that even when a form is approved, what we see in the field may not be reflective of what's been approved. Because of that, we've required on nearly all forms a 48-hour notice prior to certain work activities, such as sampling, boring installation, and site closure. This creates inefficiencies for the operator, we recognize that, and it creates more work for staff. But we have found that if we are not there to witness certain work, we are left not knowing what exactly was done, when it was done, and sometimes even where the work occurred. This underscores the importance of the operator appropriately prioritizing sites and site work, appropriately resourcing the work, and then committing to the timely completion of the work. Despite the tone of KPK's presentation on how well things are going and how much improvement is being made, these things have simply not happened. In fact, we've heard from KPK, as Caitlin mentioned earlier, that they're dedicating only 50% of their roustabout crews to CPA work, a 50% effort to return to compliance. We also heard that they added a trucking company, but COGCC has heard from another of their contractors that they're no longer working for KPK. And you've also heard about significant safety concerns. The original 901A order issued April 2021 documented several safety concerns. But as you've been shown, these concerns carry forward to this day at not only new sites, but some of the same sites. So much so that a second 901A order was issued to make it clear that certain flow lines should not be turned back on until the Rogers site was stabilized, the flow line repaired and tested, and the excavations backfilled. And twice we've had safety stand downs. Commissioners, we entered into this compliance plan agreement with the hopes that KPK would take full ownership and commitment to their return to compliance. KPK tells us that they are committed, but as Nikki has made clear, their actions demonstrate otherwise. Instead, we've seen inconsistent implementation of their plans. We've not been able to rebuild staff's trust in this operator, and staff has borne the burden of the increased workload. In short, KPK has made very little progress, positive progress, since December of 2021. KPK continues to dig as they identify new spills, but frankly, they're not able to dig themselves out of the hole they're in. I've been with this agency since 2010, environmental manager since 2014, and our staff's workload has never been higher. But we are currently coping with an unsustainable amount of work, primarily dedicated to this single operator. I don't wish to see my staff burn out, and we refuse to cut corners as we execute our mission. The rules that were adopted during mission change have rightly increased the emphasis that must be placed on environmental and public safety protection. It's also right and appropriate that staff has seen an uptick in workload across the board. But when our human resources are necessarily dedicated to overseeing the work of one operator above all others, it is ever harder to efficiently and effectively implement our statutory mandate. You heard about progress from KPK, and you heard a different perspective from Nikki. Our staff remains dedicated to seeing these sites cleaned up and properly closed, and we had certainly hoped to be in a different position 17 months after issuing the first 901A order and a year after adjudicating these issues with the enforcement order and initiation of the CPA. Remember, some of these sites where they are claiming progress have been open excavations for years. So as I open my comments, I will close. Exhausted, like my staff, exhausted. Thank you for your time, and I recognize that we went long, and I apologize for that, and we're happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duranlo. We will provide KPK with an opportunity for a rebuttal. But before we do that, I have one question or I at least have one question for staff. What's your ask? If you know. AG Stafford?
Thank you, Chair Robbins. I think I'll turn that to Greg to articulate staff's position.
Sure, I appreciate that and recognize that with a presentation such as we made, an ask may follow. We were asked to provide an update, and I think we provided that update. It was not a rosy picture. We're not coming to you with a specific ask. If you want us to fully articulate what we think the best outcome moving forward would be, we can do that. But I don't think that was the purpose of our presentation today. I apologize for maybe being a little evasive, and if that's fine.
That's fine, and ultimately commissioners need to make, decisions based upon the presentations from both sides. Let me ask this a different way. We've proceeded along this path for approximately a year now. What is staff's perspective if we were to proceed along a similar path going forward?
I don't. As I mentioned, I've been here since 2010 and environmental manager since 2014. It's hard to see a positive trajectory right now. I believe that, again, we were as optimistic as anyone entering into this agreement. We've been frustrated for not just the last year, but prior to the last year as well. And, I'm not sure that the current path, I don't believe that the current path neutralizes the ongoing threat to public health, safety, welfare, the environment. I'll put it that way.
Okay. Commissioners, does anyone have initial questions for staff. I'm going to grant KPK an opportunity to respond, but I do see Commissioner Ackerman raise his hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the presentations today. I just wanted to make a suggestion, and AAG Stafford may be ahead of me here, but with regard to your question, Mr. Chair, I would find it helpful as a new commissioner to understand what options may be available to us at this point moving forward. And so by the end of the hearing, AAG Stafford, it would be helpful if you were able to enumerate some of the options.
Yeah, and actually, Commissioner Ackerman, I believe that's going to be a question that we collectively are going to speak to AAG Davenport about. AAG Stafford is in this instance representing staff, and we would want to ask, and I've already thought about that. I think it's a great question. And I think it may involve actually us utilizing our executive session protocol to get some perspective from our attorney on options as we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Okay, Mr. Jacobs, I want to give you a chance at rebuttal. Honestly, I'll be honest, I wasn't keeping time on either side, but I will give you whatever time you think is appropriate. Before we jump into that, do you want to have a chance to gather with your client for a few minutes and sync your thoughts up, or are you ready to roll?
I think we would benefit from a few minutes break, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair.
How much time do you want?
10 minutes, just as was taken before, would be fine. Thank you.
Okay, let's return at 11:30.
Thank you.
All right, we are back on the record. At this time, we will provide KPK with a response to respond to the staff presentation. Mr. Jacobs, you and your witnesses are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If Ms. Pritchard could bring up a couple more slides and screen share those. I'll start with that. Our project manager, Mr. Totkus, will speak a little bit to some of his reactions to the staff's presentation. And then I'll conclude with a couple of other points on in response to specific assertions made by staff during their presentation, which by my tally went about 50 minutes as compared to our 30. And again, we asked for staff slides ahead of time, hoping to avoid any surprises and make for a more fair and balanced presentation and opportunities here for you, for your benefit, commissioners. Staff chose not to provide us with those slides.
Mr. Jacobs, if I could just add for a second, and I apologize, Chair. I gave you the exact reason why staff would not be providing their slides. I'm frustrated by that assertion there that we refuse to provide slides. We were still working on them until this morning, and I communicated that to you in an email. So I just want to put that on the record before we get any further here.
Okay, fair, fine. So hold on just a sec. Stop screen sharing just for a sec.
Thank you. We will do so.
Let's talk process.
Sure.
So the process that I contemplate is providing you, Mr. Jacobs, with an additional 20 minutes, additional 25,
Won't take that long.
Yeah, I mean, you should be able to get through this in, a prudent amount of time. I want to provide that process. I'm then going to suggest to my commissioners that it would make sense to go into an executive session so that we can talk with our lawyer. And I'm probably going to call a lunch between that. Mr. Jacobs, I'm happy to call lunch right now if you want to take 45 minutes and go over the slides.
We can respond. We took the 10 minutes. I think that's fair. We're not going to be encyclopedic in our response. It would take too long. And frankly, I don't know that that's productive. We need to hit a few points in response and some overarching ones that we're trying to be constructive in our response and how to improve this process and move forward, because we think that's the best path forward. But
Okay.
10 or 15 minutes ought to do it. And then I think your plan for lunch and executive session are fine.
Okay, then let's go forward. Let's have Ms. Pritchard go ahead and screen share.
Thank you. we've identified some remaining barriers to greater progress in our work under the CPA. And they really touch on so many of the sites and issues raised both by KPK in our presentation and also by staff and its responsive presentation. One is background metals. The table 915-1 values are exceedingly low. This is a ubiquitous problem. Every operator has this issue. As the chair knows from our Thursday meetings, we've had issues surrounding how to calculate the background. Arsenic is a great example. It's everywhere in soils along the Front Range. It's elevated above 915-1 values. How you calculate that, there's an established staff methodology for that, but we weren't allowed to use that at soil spread fields. So we tried to develop an EPA method and propose that, but that was rejected by staff. Now we're being asked to develop our own ad hoc or one-off method just to establish what is the appropriate background level for arsenic at each and every site. That's not an approved method. That's us going to find a rock and bringing it to staff and then saying, no, bring me another rock. It's not a very efficient or effective process, and it's unfair to KPK relative to other operators who simply follow the established background statistical method for determining what's an appropriate level of arsenic to put back in the hole because it's all over the place. Mother Nature put it there. This is causing a lot of delay, and many of our sites close to closure and close to backfill are being held up over this issue. Staff's prolonged review of forms is also concerning. Forms are averaging over 50 days to process by our tally, and that's without having been returned to draft. Now, we take full ownership of the content of those forms, and we've improved in our content, as you heard. Those forms have, much better completion data. We've had some issues on occasion with a misperception about tabular data not being included when it in fact was. They're returned to draft anyway. So this is a huge problem. And some of the delays in our work that you heard about from staff's presentation, the form had been in and pending approval for 20 days before we could get to remediation. That's why remediation didn't happen faster. We need approval. Now, I know that staff is very busy, and we're not trying to monopolize their time. And it sounds like Mr. Duranlo feels he's holding our hand and bending over backwards for us. We're happy to explore other options. Can we engage a retired staff person? Maybe Mr. Gentadas would like some additional work and go over some of the work ahead of Ms. Graber, ahead of her colleagues on staff. And KPK would fund that. We proposed that conceptually to Ms. Stafford last week, or earlier this week, excuse me. And that we want to find ways to make this work better for us and for staff. It's hard to show progress on a quarterly basis when you've got 50+ days just to get a Form 27 approved, assuming it's not returned to draft. And then you go to the back of the queue, it's all first in, first out. It'll be another 30+ days before that form gets reviewed again. It's never reprioritized because it was in once already, and maybe there was a minor problem. We've had 10 forms at once rejected en masse, only 3 of which we could tell had any issues with them. They all returned to 30+, 40, 50+ day processing times until approval. So that is a significant problem. Next slide, please. Staff's recent rejection of our email communications used to facilitate project management dialogue is another example. We've gone along with it. We understand that staff feels that all scope-related communications should be in a form, but that then goes back to the prior issue about delay in processing forms and approving them. So unlike other operators, our email communication is heavily constrained, and nothing affecting scope can be outside a form. And that is a very recent development within the last several weeks that's been communicated to us. So the goalposts are moving in that regard. Maybe it's an improvement in terms of the forms-based system, but it's a change, and we're adapting to that. And I'm happy to have Kevin and Craig speak to that in a moment. We've had problems with web forms, our maps in particular. Unexpectedly, in recent weeks, our maps were not openable. They were showing up as corrupted on the other side when staff was looking at our forms and the associated maps. This has never happened. They're submitted in PDF. They have to be a PDF to go into the system. We have been doing nothing different in our treatment and creation of PDFs of maps, but this is a glitch and it's contributed to delay. We're working constructively to avoid those problems moving forward. And lastly, you know, we want to explore creative solutions, like I just proposed, in terms of contracting with someone to help do the staff work, reviewing our stuff, so it can get done. And with that, let me turn it to Kevin Totkis, who wants to raise a few points in response to staff's presentation as well.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I've been KPK's primary contractor, the senior project manager, for 3 months now. And while I think Caitlin and Nikki, they brought up some interesting points and concerns in their presentation, I walked away with that with a very distinctive interpretation of the data that they presented. First of all, I was under the impression that this was a GRIP and CPA update, that we were providing information regarding GRIP and CPA sites to the commission today. And I'll remind the commission that it wasn't until that presentation spoke about the grant site that we even touched on GRIP sites. But as such, I feel it's fair to provide the commission with some information on the sites that were discussed. The Music McClintock site, we submitted a Form 27 in August, I believe August 15th. That form's still in draft or in pending process review. So it's not like that site hasn't been touched or additional work has been proposed out there or forgotten by any means. Like I said, there's an outstanding form. I believe the next site that was discussed was the Peak Montoya site. We've been out there. There's been significant progress addressing the environmental concerns at that site. If there's any perceptions about lack of progress, it's probably because a lot of the work is being conducted with hydrovac to avoid conflicts with existing infrastructure out there. Craig recently supplied additional information to staff regarding the source of the release with photographs and everything. So everything's been very transparent out there. The Greeley National Bank excavation, again, we've been out there overseeing those excavation activities. We've clearly identified historic contamination and open excavation activities out there that were conducted immediately adjacent to that excavation. And we firmly believe that there's commingled contamination associated with historic contamination out there. So I don't want the commission to walk away with the impression that the contamination out there is solely the responsibility of KPK at this point. I-23, the UPR 42 Pan Am I-23 facility, I think that's the shining example of KPK's commitment to getting out there and addressing contamination, and the commitment that they made and that we touched on in the presentation regarding site access, communication, dedication of resources. But that site is by no means complete. There's additional excavation or resource removal that could, there's additional site investigation that needs to be conducted. We've clearly identified groundwater contamination, and we're diligently working on a Form 20. We actually just submitted the Form 27 to move that site into remediation phase and continue the investigation out there. Again, Rogers, we spoke heavily about that, and the drone footage that was presented to the commission, I think, is an excellent example, again, of the site access controls and the effort that KPK was exerting to control the site, given the nature of the location of that facility. The numerous site inspections, the attention that KPK provided, and the attention that my staff provided to providing screening and excavation direction out there, I don't think can be minimized by any means. Again, you spoke of the Stromquist site and that the forms repeatedly be returned to draft. Again, that was, I believe, a web forms issue. We respond to that. That gets back to draft, we update, we re-upload of detachments, and the problem just doesn't resolve. And as the slide and we presented before, web forms has no help feature. There's no technical support. There's nothing that can be done to resolve that problem on our end. Then we finally, I believe, get into Grant. I think it's important to note to commission that the Form 27 to try to get that whole that excavation backfilled and continue remediation activities out there was submitted in August. It was returned to draft based on comments that Nikki provided, disagreeing with the assessment data that we presented, and she felt additional excavation was warranted. I thought I provided additional, responded to her comments in a supplemental submittal. That form is still in draft, waiting on approval. So I don't want the commission to think that these sites are forgotten. Morgan's the same way. We submitted the backfill request and information. The form was returned to draft. We resubmitted. As of September, Nikki said that was supposed to be returned to draft. It was not returned to draft until I reminded staff, and it was returned on September 28th. We are diligently working to address those comments, and I want to reiterate to staff that we have not forgotten about these sites, that they remain high priority, and I'm committed to responding to staff concerns to make sure those sites move forward. I think it's also important to note that the significant effort and site investigation activities that have been made towards the Coslet A9. Again, that site investigation is currently ongoing. KPK conducts regular fluid recoveries from that excavation. I think it's completely fair to characterize that that is active and is recognized as a high priority and is being addressed as such. Premium turkey farm, absolutely, there is additional excavation. No additional excavation is planned out there because that hole is deep enough that we feel like it's appropriate to continue the investigation using in situ investigation techniques and cleanup techniques. Significant effort has been made to address that. Sukla Brown, Facility 4, Paul Hines, Yaxel, Doversberger, Totems, the Hewitt sites, not to mention that the additional site investigation work that we conducted in the McCallum field, I think are all very worthwhile to discuss and bring to the attention of the commission that all of those sites have received updated forms and active investigations.
Thank you, Kevin.
So with that,
I'll
turn it back over to John. Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much. Just a few additional points and then maybe a question related to your executive session, Mr. Chair. There's been some insinuation that we're only doing a 50% level of effort. We have 8 roustabout crews and there are 4 crews dedicated to remediation, active remediation of CPA sites. That varies over time and can be higher than that, but on average, I think that's correct. The other 4 are not just doing operations, they are dealing with P&A work. And that's an important source of revenue for the company so that we can continue our operations, even with closures and shut-in conditions on a significant number of wells. And the ability to pay and our available resources are a recognized constraint in the prior findings of this commission last summer and fall. So I just want to acknowledge that it's not a 50% effort, it's a 100+% effort, and we're using all available resources, the implication to the contrary notwithstanding. I want to touch on a couple of points about Rogers. The LGDs, Frederick and Weld County, and the developer were all notified as indicated in the Form 19. And Mr. Mailer, the Vice President of Land, did indicate to our public commenter this morning, whose last name escapes me, that Mr. Lee, the developer, had been communicated with and was communicated with several times and kept up to date on the progress of work adjacent to the subdivision there at the Rogers location. The point was made that we waited 20 days or so, or some period of time, to actually engage in some characterization work at Rogers. We were waiting on a forms approval. It's the same issue I mentioned earlier. We could not proceed without approval, and once we got it, we have proceeded promptly. The SAC battery and wellheads was the subject of an aerial photograph, some allegations about a former concrete sump. There's nothing of the sort there. That's a site of P&A work. It's not a grip site or an active spill site. Some impacts were identified and the subject of a Form 19, because they were discovered in the course of the P&A work at that site. Some construction debris and chunks of concrete were apparently dumped there. It's not a sump. It's not an old infrastructure or a source of contamination to the best of our knowledge. And so that is simply factually inaccurate and misleading. The soil spread field drone images you saw on one of the slides do not indicate plant health. They're not capable of indicating plant health. That's a misleading image, and it's directly contrary to the work on the ground and observations made by reclamation staff that vegetation in the disturbed areas at soil spread field is strong and healthy and improving. And then finally, the proper statistical analysis is what's holding up a lot of these sites. Very briefly, we covered SAC. Facility 4 North near the high school in Frederick. There's in situ treatment gone on there, and certainly there are no impacts remaining from KPK's perspective. Staff may dispute that, but it's misleading to say we've taken no action there. And it's disturbing, really. Let's be fair about the conditions at that site and the activity that's taken place there. And yeah, I think that concludes our points. It's a little disjointed. We did the best we could in the time available. I hope that gives you a little fair perspective of our progress, our effort, and our intention to move forward. My last point, Mr. Chair, is that this was always advertised as an update, as is the update in January by your order entered in June. To the extent you wish to take other action, which is within your authority, I do express some concern about any other action besides giving us the opportunity to get to a January update. And if at the conclusion of that update, you wish to take certain action, then obviously KPK's due process concerns with what that action might be can be raised at an appropriate time. But I do think that, you know, this is not an evidentiary hearing. This is an update. We attempted to provide you with a reasonable and fair update in 30 minutes. It's gone considerably longer. Staff has not asked you to take specific action. And I in fact asked Ms. Stafford ahead of time if she was going to ask you to take specific action. And she said at that time, no, she did not know that her client wanted specific action taken. So to the extent you decide to take other action, I may have concerns that I need to raise on the record. And I just wanted to make that clear.
Let's cross bridges once we get to them. I would like to go into an executive session. I've got two commissioners that weren't here in June, and I think it would be helpful for them to understand what happened and what did not happen in June, and you know what was to happen today, and the January hearing that or final update that I'm aware of as well. So, commissioners, I think we're better served having an executive session and then potentially coming out of the executive session and then having questions and answers for both sides here. But I'm just one commissioner. If folks feel they have questions that they'd like to lodge now, you know, we can certainly do that. But I think getting some legal advice and getting some of our commissioners, you know, more up to speed on sort of the process that we're involved in might be helpful. And then we can make sure that the panel or that Mr. Jacobs and his folks and Ms. Stafford and her folks are available for questions once we come out of the session. Is everybody okay with that? Hey, AG Davenport.
Thank you, Chair. I apologize. I'm not sure. Are we doing a lunch break and then executive session, or is executive session over lunch break? Okay.
I was going to suggest we do a lunch break and then executive session. So seeing no one jumping up and down, let's do that. Let's come back at, let's take, you know, like 45 minutes. Let's come back at 12:40. And then at 12:40, we will plan on convening an executive session to receive legal advice on this matter. That's probably going to be 30 minutes or so. I'm just giving the parties kind of the next steps of play here. So we would probably be coming back for Q&A at about 1:15 or thereabouts. So,
Mr. Chair, may I make a suggestion?
yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Could we just vote now to go into executive session so that we can go directly into executive session rather than have to come back into the public session at 12:40 and vote to go in?
That's an excellent idea. Do you want to read your script?
Thank you. Yes, I will. Commissioners, pursuant to open meetings law, the commission is entitled to enter into executive session at this meeting to receive legal advice pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute, section 246402, 3A, Roman 2. The topics of executive session were identified in the course of commission discussion today. They are legal advice on the commission's options pursuant to today's hearing / update and going forward in regard to this matter, KPK enforcement matter. Mr. Chair, I invite you to encourage a motion to enter into executive session for the purpose I just named.
So encouraged.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Messner to go into executive session, second by Commissioner McGowan. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So for the parties and for the 144 people that are listening in, we're going to go into executive session at approximately 12:40. We think that's going to take about 30 minutes. So 1:10-ish, we would plan on reconvening here, and we would encourage the parties to the KPK update to be present for potential questions at that time. All right. See everybody about 1:10-ish.